Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to episode 17 of Birth of the Middle Ages. Crazy that we're almost on episode 20. Almost, it's been what? We've been doing this for 3 full months about. Started middle of March, I think. Something like that. But yeah, we're back tonight with Birth of the Middle Ages, talking more about Islam. Yeah, today we're going to be hopefully finishing up this chapter on Islam, chapter 10, which is on the culture of Islam. Now, from what I'm finding, the chapter title is a bit deceptive, because this first section we read last week, and I read a little bit ahead today, it's more the political situation of Islam. The kind of the interworking the politics of the early Islamic state in the Middle East and North Africa, Spain, which I find a lot more interesting than the culture. So maybe this chapter will be better than I thought, because I complained a good bit about it before I even read any of it. So hopefully this chapter exceeds expectations. It might not. I don't trust Moss anymore. I don't trust this author. But after this chapter is section 4, the last section of the book. It is about Charlemagne, his ancestors, and himself. I think there's a bit about Charles Martel, Charlemagne's father Pepin, and then Charlemagne himself. It ends with Charlemagne's death in 814. That's the last chapter of the last section. But it should only take us probably 3 weeks to get through that, if I stream, 2 days a week, which, I keep my Fridays a little bit more flexible. We've canceled a decent number of Fridays in the past, so we'll see. But what I'm getting at is we might need to find another book. We might need to make a decision on what the next book is. I'm not entirely sure what it's going to be yet. I might try to find something on the founding of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, Charlemagne, I agree, is the founder of the Holy Roman Empire, but I'm more talking about, I think, is Otto III. King Otto. He's who everyone agrees is the actual founder of the Holy Roman Empire. No audio for you? I'm watching stream on my phone too. I have my earbud in and I can't hear anything either. This is weird. Okay, you got it back? Good, because I have stream up on my phone. I'm watching it. I keep it up on my phone just to kind of see what y'all see. And I have my earbud in, and I can't hear it either. That's interesting. Odd, I still can't hear it on my end. Oh well. Might just be a me problem. Might just be my phone is terrible. My earbuds are terrible. Okay, but if everyone has audio, let me know if it goes out again, because it might be something on my end. I don't think it is. I hope it's not. Okay. But what was I saying? Oh yeah, Holy Roman Empire. We might find something on that. More the 1000s. Yeah, I'd probably have to just restart stream, see if that works, or it might just be my microphone unplugging or something. But so I'm going to look into a book on that because that is of interest to me. We might also try to find something on the Normans. But that's interesting to me, but I'm not, I'm not terribly, I'm not thinking that's the play. We could always continue. I have a lot of different PDFs. I'm going to go through them and see if there's any PDF I already have. That would be a good read. But if not, then I will look up something and I will find I will find us a book to read. You can be certain of that, and it will be boring. You're all going to find it extremely boring, but I'm going to have the time of my life. We could just read Daily Life in the World of Charlemagne. That's one of my favorites. Because it's literally just the nitty gritty, the daily life of the people of the Frankish Empire under Charlemagne. It's a great book. It's incredibly boring, but I love the book. Great book. We might read that one. Cuz I don't want to read on I want to save En route. If I'm going to read En route, it's going to be later. It's going to be when I've really, really developed the stream well enough that I can do it exactly how I want to. Because eventually I would love to read En route, the Cathedral, and the Oblate. I would love to read that entire trilogy on stream, just for your sake, just for all of y'all's sake. Trying to look at my bookshelf that I have. My desk is also a bookshelf. It has some shelves on it that I have a bunch of books on. Ooh, Carolingian art. That could be a good one. Ooh, I was talking about adding a Tuesday stream where we look at art. That might be a good book to read for that. Just do a Tuesday stream where we just read that book. Also would be incredibly boring. But we shall see. I don't know if we want to continue with history, maybe take a break, read a short book. But no, I want to keep this a history-based channel, so we'll stick with history. We'll find something. I will pick something. I'm not going to leave it up to you people. Because y'all don't know what y'all want. I know what y'all want. Y'all want Frankish history. Because that's what I want. And it's my channel, so I'm going to do whatever I want. I need a bookshelf. I have too many books. I'm realizing how many books I have on Charlemagne. Or, his parents. I think I have 9. I have 9 separate books. I have the Merovingian kingdoms, which that one goes up until Charlemagne's dad. Because Charlemagne's dad becomes the king of the Franks in 751, and that's when that book stops. I have Henri Peren's Mohammed and Charlemagne. I have Birth of the Middle Ages, a hard copy of that. I have Carolingian Art. I have The Carolingians by Pierre Riche. I have The Age of Charles Martel by Paul Foraker. Daily Life in the World of Charlemagne by Pierre Riche again. And I have Medieval Cities and the Origins, the Revival and Origins and Revival of Trade, which is partially about Charlemagne's time period. So he's mentioned in it, at least. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, 8 or 9. I think there's one up there that I'm missing. I definitely have a type of book I like to read. But like I said, we'll figure out what's next. But I have rambled for too long. Let's get to the actual book. So, to recap, we finished up the Muslim conquests, their conquest of North Africa, their fights with the Berbers, which he did not get into in the slightest, which annoys me because I have a deep respect for the Berber tribes in Morocco. The Berbers, the Spain, he didn't talk at all about Don Pelayo and the final uh, resistance to Islam in the Asturias Mountains. He talked about Charles Martel, so that's good. But we finished that up, and then we started getting into chapter 10, the culture of Islam, which all it's been is just the political intrigues and the political succession of Muhammad. So he starts talking about Muhammad and how he didn't leave an actual successor. He had children, and some of his successors, who are the caliphs, which means successor, they were successors of the prophet, and some of the different caliphs and their tribes, their factions. The Umayyad dynasty. Let's see. The first one was I guess, I don't know if it really had a name, but yeah, the Umayyads were I think the first, it looks like, and then they were usurped, and then I think the last, that faction was usurped. A lot of infighting among the Islamic nations. And he deals a little bit with how as they spread out, they weren't necessarily unified politically, but they were unified by faith. And that is one way they mirror the Christian nations, is that, we have a lot of different factions in Europe. The British are the British, the French are the French, the Germans are the German, the Italian are the Italian. What unites them all is that they are Catholic. At least at this time period. Obviously the English are Protestant mostly now, the Germans are Protestant. But they were all Catholic at that time period, and they were a block of resistance. And so that's really where the similarities between the two stops, is that, they're a bunch of nations united by faith. Other than that, the faith is very different. Obviously, both religions are monotheistic, and that's the main similarity. The main similarity, they're both Abrahamic religions. We get our faith from Abraham, we're the successors of the Jews, of the Israelites, us Catholics. The Muslims think that they are also descendant of Abraham. They consider themselves an Abrahamic religion. He is considered their founder. So that's really where the similarities and the connections stop, because ideologically they were very, very different. Muslims, they have very strict rules about what you can and can't eat, what's haram. I don't even know what haram is. I don't, and I'm not gonna sit here and pretend I'm some Islamic scholar. I really don't know a lot of what Islam believes. I know the main things. I know about jihad. I know about Ramadan, and I know about the no eating pork stuff. The main stuff. But I know a lot about Christianity. I've been Catholic all my life. But ideologically, the Catholic Catholic religion and the Islamic religion are opposed. Can I expound on how they are? Not well. There are much smarter people than me who can tell you why. But maybe it's something I'll look into so I can explain it better. I really should look into it better. That way, when I bring it up, I'm not just floundering for something to say about it. But let's get into the actual reading. Let me drink some water first. Good old water. In the earliest days of Islam, when Muhammad led his followers to Medina to plunder the caravans, a simple division of spoils was all that was needed in the way of financial organization. This principle lasted well into the following stage, for the earlier Umayyad Empire was in effect based on a system of plunder. The conquering Arabs lodged in great military camps were supported by the tribute exacted from the subject population. The surplus revenues accrued to the central treasury at Medina, out of which the Caliph dispensed bounty to his more important followers. It soon, however, became evident that this primitive plan was insufficient for the needs of the empire. As the faith of Islam extended, so the revenue from taxation tended to diminish. Sorry, 1 second. Why is... Sorry, got distracted by something. Alright, so it soon, however, became evident that this primitive plan was insufficient for the needs of the empire. As the faith of Islam extended, so the revenue from taxation tended to diminish, for only unbelievers were liable to tribute. The difficulty was met at first by continuing to exact it from the new converts, but as this class grew more influential, its grievances were bound to cause trouble, and it proved ultimately one of the chief agents in the downfall of the Umayyad house. Gradually, the theory of a dominant race holding to ransom huge territories and peoples became untenable. One stage of the process is seen in the compromise by which all landowners, irrespective of creed, paid ground taxes to the treasury, while the poll tax was reserved for the unbelievers, an outward and visible sign of Muslim superiority. So they instituted a property tax. Everyone had to pay a property tax. And that solved their issues. And I believe that idea continued throughout the developing Islamic world up till the Ottoman Turks took over Constantinople. I could be wrong, but the way that the Ottomans were able to levy large amounts of troops, I'm not sure I used levy correctly there. They were able to recruit a lot of troops, a lot of materials. They were a very rich nation, especially in the 1500s and the beginning of the 1600s. Very wealthy empire. And I believe these ground taxes were part of that. Might not have been a huge part of it, but they were definitely part of it. The breakdown of this exclusive system was only one of the many changes which marked the advent of the Abbasid dynasty. The dominions of Islam had been wrested from two ancient and highly developed empires, Rome and Persia. The Abbasid dynasty were the ones who replaced the Umayyads. Nothing in the previous experience of the desert nomads had prepared them for the complicated administration made necessary by their new conditions. The Byzantine machinery of government, in consequence, was taken over by the conquerors in Syria and Egypt, and the evidence of recently discovered papyri proves the continuance of the Roman fiscal and administrative system in these countries. When the capital was shifted to Baghdad, the influence of Persia, in its turn, made itself felt upon the central government. The new capital lay only 30 miles distant from Ctesiphon. I actually, before stream, I looked that word up. I looked up how to pronounce it. Ctesiphon, the former center of the Sassanid rulers, and the new dynasty at once endeavored to secure a fusion of Arab and Persian and to maintain an equal balance between them. The change is strikingly seen in the altered position of the caliph. In the days of Abu Bakr, immediately after the Prophet's death, the authority emanating from Medina had been of a spiritual order. This authority had subsequently been transformed by the Umayyad statesmen of Damascus into an organized political domination, though traces of its Arabic origin still lingered in the patriarchal and nationalist character of the Umayyad rule. The Abbasid Caliphate was, in one sense, a return to the original principles of Islam. The movement which brought it into being was largely of a religious nature, a reaction against the secular Umayyads, and in consequence the new rulers took care to buttress their authority with the theories of Medina theologians, theories constructed from the text of the Quran, eked out by oral tradition, and smelling somewhat of the lamp, since for over a century the theocrats of the Hejaz had been alienated from the real practice of Muslim administration at Damascus. That has got to be the longest sentence I've ever read. Because it starts here and ends there. The Abbasid... I'm just going to reread it again because I lost focus while I was reading it. I don't know what happened. Long sentence. The Abbasid Caliphate was, in one sense, a return to the original principles of Islam. The movement which brought it into being was largely of a religious nature, a reaction against the secular Umayyads, and in consequence the new rulers took care to buttress their authority with the theories of Medina theologians, theories constructed from the text of the Quran. Okay, so took care to buttress their authority with the theories of Medina theologians, theories constructed from the text of the Quran, eked out by oral tradition, and smelling somewhat of the lamp, since for over a century the theocrats of the Hejaz had been alienated from the real practice of Muslim administration at Damascus. Yeah, sometimes his sentences just kind of are very poorly worded. And they're very poorly constructed. Like, there's got to have been a better way to write this sentence. Even if you just put a period here and put these were eked out by oral tradition and smelled somewhat of the lamp. Like, I don't know, it's such a long sentence. You gotta break it up a little bit. That way that way the reader doesn't lose focus in the middle of a sentence, because your sentence is half a paragraph. Anyway, just my personal gripes with his writing style. Muhammad had been absolute in all spheres, and so in theory was the Abbasid Caliph. This absolutism was, however, limited in several directions. The sovereignty exercised over the various emirates was, it has been shown, more apparent than real, and even in the capital itself the power of the caliphate was often overshadowed by that of the viziers. Viziers? Weaker caliphs were content to withdraw from the public gaze to the secluded pleasures of the harem, leaving to their officials the task of ruling the empire, and to their Khorasanian bodyguard the defense of their persons. Leaders of the army also acquired political influence, and caliphs were frequently made and unmade by the hands of the military. Below the viziers was a complex series of government departments, or divans, which dealt with the affairs of the treasury, the chancery, the armory, the imperial household, and so forth. One of the most important of these was the Divan al-Barid, or state post, an interesting example of the manner in which the caliphs inherited the traditions of both Rome and Persia. The name Barid is derived from the Latin veridus, a post horse, and like the cursus publicus, it was a state institution, designed to secure centralized control and rapid movements of troops and officials. Other features are reminiscent of the old Achaemenid system of Persia described by Herodotus. And like both its forebears, the purpose of the Abbasid postal organization included espionage, which was exercised on an extensive scale in all classes of society. The development of this espionage into one of the main instruments of government is typical of the Oriental methods of Baghdad. No official was trusted, and even the caliph's own family was under strict surveillance. The police formed an important part of the intelligence service, and their duties included interference in the minutest details of daily life, while in every city a swarm of local officers, judges, tax gatherers, and stewards of the crown lands reduced still further the liberty of the subject. Yeah, this chapter is a lot more interesting than I thought it would be. I'm pleasantly surprised. I don't have much to say about it, but the political intrigues and the political situation is always of interest to me. I found a book a while ago, last year. Got me back into reading. Yeah, it was last year, about probably August. I really got back into reading. It was at that time I kind of discovered my enthusiasm for Charlemagne and the Frankish Empire. But before I discovered how interested I was in the Carolingians, I had found a book about Blessed Karl of Austria. There was I need to stop saying I need to focus on not saying The more I do it, and the more I remind myself out loud I need to stop going the better I'll be about it. But there was a girl I dated back in, it's about a year ago. We had started dating in June or July. And then, whatever happened, we broke up in September. My life is not important. But she suggested I look into Blessed Karl of Austria. It was fine. I found a very good book about him by Herbert Vivian. I forget the exact title of the book, but it's a very good book. And I found it interesting. She's obviously a religious girl, so she was more interested in the religious aspect of his life. But I found the political intrigues very interesting. I was also interested in the religious. He is a saint, and that's, it's a very edifying. The story of his life is very edifying. He's a very edifying monarch. But I also found the political situation in Austria-Hungary in World War I very interesting, especially because it is, it's World War I. The political situation there was insane. The Balkans all hate each other, but they're all united under the empire. They hate each other, but they're loyal to Austria. It's great. Great stuff. But the political stuff like this always interests me. Even if I never, like I said, I don't have a lot to say about it. It's not my area of expertise. I can't really delve into it and develop these ideas very well. Unfortunately. I wish I could do that for you people. I wish I could be a better streamer. For you. But, yeah, I find it interesting. That this is the type of stuff that really, really gets me going. The change from the nationalist, aristocratic government of Damascus to the cosmopolitan despotism of Baghdad only accelerated the amalgamation of conquerors and conquered. Henceforth, all were slaves under one master, but the equalizing process had begun in Umayyad times. So long as the Arab limited in numbers and still more in education, retained the monopoly of the true faith and lived in Spartan exclusiveness, fenced off from the common herd in his armed camp, drawing his livelihood from the caliph's bounty, he was able to maintain his position of superiority. But these privileges were destined to be of short duration. On the one hand, material interest and religious indifference swelled the numbers of the non-Arab converts, and in consequence lessened the revenues from unbelievers. On the other, now that the wars of conquest were over, the Arab ceased to be a state pensioner, and became landowner, peasant, or small tradesman, subject to the economic laws and social distinctions of the country in which he found himself. Education and intellectual ability were needed if he was to hold his own, for the intricate civilization of Byzantine times continued with little change, demanding skilled administrators as before. Even in the early days, Christians were appointed to positions of trust, particularly in matters of finance, and the toleration of non-Muslim faiths which was practiced under the Umayyads left these communities free to prosper materially, provided they paid the necessary taxes, which were, on the whole, no heavier than those formerly exacted by the Byzantine government. A large measure of self-government was granted to the Christians, and churches and monasteries flourished. It is significant that these centuries were marked by a wave of missionary enterprise on the part of the Nestorians, which swept across Asia and even penetrated into China. Fanaticism, it is true, at certain periods gained the upper hand. Arab national pride, too, found expression in the ordinances forbidding Christians to keep Muslim slaves, denying them various legal privileges, and even insisting on a special dress. But the official attitude remained generally tolerant, and the dwindling of Christian communities was due to other causes than persecution. I don't know how much I believe that. Among the educated classes, much common ground was discovered between the two religions, and the developments of Muslim theology in Syria and Egypt show the influence of Christian thought. Just as in these days attempts are made to harmonize modern science and religion, so the philosophic background of the ancient world, which had been to some extent reconciled with Christianity, had now to be invoked to explain the tenets of Islam, in order to secure the acceptance of thinking men. The unreflecting, meanwhile, saw the finger of God and the amazing successes of Arabian armies, and bowed before the fait accompli. Lastly, the splendor that radiated from the capitals of Islam, where a brilliant civilization was shaping itself under the impact of old and new forces, exercised a potent influence on the imagination. In Spain, for example, the barbarous Latin of the chroniclers and theologians could not hold its own against the attractions of Arabic poetry and literature. Even among the Christians, a 9th century writer bitterly complains, the beauties of the Arabic tongue are more esteemed than the writings of the fathers. Yeah, that's just because they probably suppressed everything that wasn't in Arabic. The barbarous Latin. There's nothing barbaric about Latin. Latin's a beautiful language. Maybe the Spanish just didn't speak it well. Maybe the maybe the Visigoths just didn't know how to speak Latin correctly. Yeah, this I'm not buying. I don't know enough specifically to refute it, but I just don't buy it. But that's just me. The great expansion of trade which followed in the wake of the Muslim Empire was one of the chief developments which impressed upon it that unity to which allusion has already been made. Despite the fact that the industries of Syria and Egypt, the richest provinces of the Byzantine Empire, continued as before to produce their glasswork, textiles, and other manufactured articles, special advantages were secured to commerce by the new regime. Once settled, the Arab tends naturally to engage in trade. The prosperity of the kingdom of Hira was based on its great fairs, just as that of Yemen, at the other extremity of the peninsula, was due to the Asiatic cargoes passing through its port, while the markets and caravans of Mecca constituted its staple industry. Muhammad himself had been a trader, and in the Quran an honorable position is assigned to the merchant. Wonder what other group of people were merchants. I wonder what other group of people were notably pretty much only merchants, especially at this time period. It's a real nose scratcher. The conditions of Muslim social life were therefore more favorable to trading enterprise than those of the Greco-Roman world with its contempt of the Bonostic. Bonostic? That's a word. I've never heard this word before. Bonostic. Merely mechanical or routine. I guess it probably the same root word as banal. It's contempt of the purely mechanical. I don't know if you could describe the Roman Empire as having contempt of the mechanical. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure what he's trying to say here. And the geography of the Arab dominions was specially advantageous for this purpose. The feuds of Rome and Persia, which had checked the flow of commerce between East and West, were now at an end, and a solid block of territory under one ruler stretched from the Atlantic coast to the steppes of Central Asia. Sorry. The Red Sea and Persian Gulf were no longer rival, but alternative routes, and all the gold and ivory of Central Africa, the spices and perfumes of the Far East, reached Europe only after passing through Muslim hands. It is noticeable that the great cities of the empire lie at the intersection of long travel routes. Damascus, situated at the point where the caravans from Central Asia approached the Mediterranean, received also the merchandise of Egypt, Syria, and the Red Sea traffic. Cairo was a mart for the raw products of Asia and Africa, as well as a manufacturing center, and from Egypt a series of prosperous trading towns along the coast led to the capitals of northern Africa and Spain. Basra, on the Euphrates, was built soon after the conquest of Persia to control the Persian Gulf and its eastern trade, but its importance was eventually eclipsed by Baghdad. A canal between Tigris and Euphrates united the latter city to the overland routes from Asia Minor, Syria, and Egypt, while caravans from Central Asia descended from the highlands of Persia and Bokhara at its gates. More extensive still was the maritime trade. In the stories of Sinbad the Sailor, who is represented as having lived in the early 9th century under the Abbasid Caliph, Harun al-Rashid, the voyages start always from Baghdad, and many of the incidents and places mentioned can be corroborated or identified from other sources. Arab itineraries describe the traders in Ceylon, Malabar, and the Indian coast towns, and Chinese records prove the existence of colonies of Arab traders under the Tang dynasty. Some even penetrated as far as Korea. In the west, the ports of Egypt and North Africa showed great activity, and their shipping linked the cities of the southern Mediterranean shore as far as Spain. But little trade was done with France and Italy. The Muslims came to these shores as pirates, not merchants. Byzantium remained the center of European commerce, and it was not until the 10th century that Muslim and Christian met together to exchange their wares, and Arabs trod the streets of Pisa and Amalfi. Well, that's not actually true, because there was the Venetians. The Venetians did trade with the Arabs a long time before the 10th century. Pretty much, I think by the 7th century they were already trading with the Arabs. The Venetians were pretty unscrupulous with who they traded with. Yeah, this is all stuff I definitely would believe. The Islamic states were very prosperous. They knew how to trade. They had good teachers. But yeah, the coast. Henri Pirenne talks about this in his book Muhammad and Charlemagne, how the Mediterranean pretty much turned into a Muslim lake at about this time, and how that pretty much killed civilization to some degree, or the aspect of trade in France, because he talks about the French markets and how they were mostly beforehand, before the Muslim invasions, they were very prosperous. The French markets were very prosperous, especially the town of Marseille, which is on the Mediterranean coast of France. And they received a lot of trade from Jewish merchants from the Middle East, Syrian merchants from the Middle East, merchants from North Africa. They received merchants from all over. And so Marseille became a very prosperous nation. And because of that, the rest of France was also very prosperous. And you had large markets. And you had a very developed city life in the Frankish kingdoms. Once Islam takes over, those markets cease to exist, essentially, because you have trade in the Mediterranean cut off. Because, like he said, they didn't visit France and Italy and Albania and Greece as merchants. They were pirates. And they pillaged and ransacked and took slaves and harassed all the good Christians. Yeah, but it benefited Islam. Benefited Islam immensely. They became extremely rich, which makes sense. The North Africa is a treasure trove. That was the breadbasket of the Roman Empire. Carthage, that was Carthage. Carthage was a trade hub, and they were a merchant. They were a merchant nation before they became a warrior nation to fight the Romans. But Carthage was extremely wealthy. And once Rome conquered it, they became more wealthy because they knew how to properly run it. They were just better. They were able to take the resources of Carthage and use them to the benefit of not just North Africa, but the known world, the entire Mediterranean. Mare Nostrum, as they call it, our ocean. Our sea, sorry. But in North Africa is a breadbasket. Lot of resources there, fertile land. It just makes sense that even the Muslims taking over, it would be a very prosperous nation, and it remained prosperous. It's not really anymore. But so modern day Carthage is modern day Tunis. Tunis really hasn't fallen out of Muslim hands ever. There was, so Charles V conquered it in the 1500s. And he held it for about, I don't think he held it for more than 50 years. At a certain point, they had the Knights of Malta were in charge and garrisoned the city of Tunis. But it was reconquered, and then it never really fell again until the 1800s. But I'll get to that. But during that time period, Tunis was a very important city to take because that's where a lot of the Barbary corsairs launched from. That's where there was their home base. That was their home base, was Tunis, and several other cities in North Africa. But Tunis was kind of the big one. And so to take Tunis meant you could kind of plug up the raids. You could kind of help stop them in some way. It didn't really work, but they tried. The Mediterranean, though, was just an Islamic sea from this point up until probably the 1700s. Lepanto was kind of the last big hurrah for the Ottoman dynasty and the Barbary Corsairs. That was the last hurrah of Muslim sea power. That was their height. We'll leave it. Yeah. That was the height of Muslim sea power. After Lepanto, it never reached that height again, but it was still there. It was still very prevalent. It was the Spanish had developed sea power at that point, so they had partial control of the Mediterranean. The English had a very strong navy, and they were uncontested in the Mediterranean at times. But who was it that stepped foot in Carthage again for the first time since the 1500s in Malta? The United States of America, baby. Barbary Coast pirates kidnapped, I think it was 170 Americans who were on a ship headed to Europe. And Thomas Jefferson sends in the Marines. Or it was Tripoli. The city of Tripoli, not Tunis. I'm sorry. Tripoli, I think, is near Tunis. It's one of those major ports that the Barbary pirates operated out of. But it was the United States Marine Corps that came in and mopped the floor with the Barbary pirates to free some Americans. It was the first conflict that the U.S. ever fought out off of U.S. soil, because it was, Thomas Jefferson was president. It was like the 1810s. It was before the 1810s, I think. Excuse me. But yeah. I don't know. That I'm kind of rambling. I'm not making much sense. So we'll get back to the book. There's a little tiny bug in my water, so I'm trying to drink carefully. All right. Oh, we have a long way to go. I've been getting sidetracked too much. All right. The influence of Islamic trade, however, made itself felt far beyond the boundaries of the empire. In the north, Trebizond was an important center, not only for its fair, which attracted dealers from all over the Near East, but also because it formed the frontier between Greek and Muslim commerce. Textiles, metalwork, and other products found their way to Constantinople by this means, and their influence can be traced in Byzantine culture. A stream of traffic also passed up the Volga and other rivers and reached central Russia and Scandinavia through the Khazar kingdom. A large number of Muslim coins, mostly from Khorasan and the eastern parts, have been discovered as far afield as Germany and the Baltic regions, and their provenance and distribution point to a considerable volume of trade, reaching its heights in the early years of the 9th century between the Asiatic provinces and northern Europe. Inside the territory of Islam, commerce was furthered by the pilgrimages which were enjoyed by its religion and prompted by the caliphs. Communications were improved by the provisions of wells and caravanserai, and great fairs were established at pilgrim centers. The Arab rulers, as they lost the ideals of their prophet and the simple manners of their ancestors, took over from the older empires which they had superseded, I'm terrible at reading. The Arab rulers, as they lost the ideals of their prophet and the simpler manners of their ancestors, took over from the older empires which they had superseded the love of luxury and display, and surrounded themselves with splendid buildings and furniture, thus further increasing the demand for various skilled products and exotic wares. Parallel with the material civilization of Islam went the development of its spiritual culture. Just as the Arab conquerors had found it necessary to adapt their primitive customs to the more highly developed systems of the subject races, so the theologians, faced with conflicting philosophies without and divergent tendencies within, began to elucidate the Quran, rearing upon this slender foundation a vast superstructure of commentary and exegesis. Inasmuch as they saw in the Quran the supreme source of religion, law, and ethics, it was essential to reconcile conflicting utterances, to classify and systematize various pronouncements, and by the aid of analogy and deduction to make the words of the Prophet apply to circumstances not envisaged by him. Notice how they say conflicting utterances. Imagine your holy book having conflicting utterances. That's crazy. That is wild to me. Because you have to be a very convoluted thinker to think anything in the Bible contradicts. Because nothing in the Bible contradicts itself. It is the perfect book. But the Muslims, he says right here, the holy book of the Muslims, the Quran, has conflicting utterances. Like, how can you take this religion seriously? And it does. I've read some passages of the Quran. I've read the ones where it says, oh, you need to make peace with the infidels. And then a couple chapters later, it's like, oh, you need to kill all of the infidels. They're unworthy to even die by your sword. You must kill them with your horse. It's like, yeah, the conflicting utterances abound in the Quran. And you have to go through some convoluted exegesis to make it even slightly make sense. It's a fake religion. It's not fake, but you get what I mean. It's an unserious religion. No matter how seriously the Muslims take it. Hence, the origin of a large part of the brilliant literary output of the Abbasid period can be traced to the study of the Quran. Even Arabic grammar, according to tradition, was first scientifically studied for the purpose of safeguarding the text. And however this may be, the development of Arabic as a literary language is closely connected with the need for explanation felt by the adherents of the new religion. In order to show the sequence of the Prophet's teaching, research into his life and the traditions of his family was made, and this, combined with a study of the lives of early heroes of Islam, gave a stimulus to the writing of history, which in Muslim hands has always retained a strong biographical and anecdotal flavor. In the same way, a large legal literature grew up based primarily on the Quran as the foundation of all authority, but drawn largely from Greek and Jewish sources in the civil and religious spheres, respectively. It was inevitable that this should be so, since the legal system had to be fitted into the framework of previously existing civilizations, of which Muhammad can have had little knowledge. Now, there was something here I wanted to say, but oh well. Unimportant. In dogmatic theology, the same problem soon began to exercise Muslim thinkers as had formerly troubled the peace of the early church. Under the influence of Greek philosophy, logical reasoning began to be applied to such subjects as the unity and attributes of God and the question of determination and free will. During the first half of the 9th century, this challenge to the orthodox upholders of literal tradition came to a head in an organized attempt to reconcile reason with authority. The official scholasticism won the day, and henceforward the only escape from its aridities was by way of mysticism. Philosophy proper followed the same path. A definite attempt was made in Avicenna to reconcile Aristotelian doctrines with Muslim thought, and his work was continued by the great school of Spanish thinkers which exercised so potent an influence upon medieval Europe. Now, this I do know about. This is actually slightly true. Not true in the way he thinks it. This is true in the fact that the Muslims in this case, if I'm recalling correctly, are the reason we have a lot of the writings of Aristotle. And it is through them and the Spanish Muslims and the Muslims in Spain that we have access to the works of Aristotle. But the conclusions that the Catholic Church draws from Aristotle are, I would imagine, very different from the conclusions the Muslims draw from Aristotle. I don't think Thomas Aquinas is drawing the same conclusions as any Muslim thinkers. That's something I heard. That was something I think I learned in like a college history course, so I don't know how reliable that is. But it is something I think I had read, was that the Muslims in Spain are the reason we have several of Aristotle's works. In the East, however, and especially in Persia, Orthodox Muslim dogma held its own, and although Greek metaphysic and psychology played their part, the mystical element is predominant in the philosophic systems evolved in this region. Translations from the Greek were also responsible for the growth of works on medicine, and a great school of physicians developed under the Abbasid dynasty. Greek models stimulated the production of encyclopedias, and the translations of Greek and Indian speculation in astronomy and mathematics led before long to original discoveries by the scholars and scientists of Islam. I think there's a bird on my roof. I hear it. I hear something weird on my roof. I have a metal roof. That's definitely a bird. I don't know what it's doing up there, but it's making noise. Let's see, where was I? Yeah, meanwhile, pure literature flourished at the Abbasid court. A literature, it is true, rather of escape than expression, but distinguished by great charm and technical virtuosity. Prose blossomed into conceits and subtleties, while poetry ranged from elegant love songs and gay drinking staves to the brooding melancholy of mystical verse writers. Muslim art is equally representative in character, for in its development may be seen with convenient clearness the many influences which combined to produce a great civilization. It is an epitome of the history of Islam in all its aspects. At first sight, owing to its rapid flowering, it gives the appearance of a new original style, which from the 9th to the 7th centuries covered vast stretches of country: Spain, North Africa, Egypt, the Near East, Persia, Turkestan, northern India, with great cities, stately mosques, and glittering palaces, all strongly marked by homogeneity of structure and ornament, in spite of local variations. This appearance, however, is delusive. One must go back to the origins to discover that the style is a fusion of old elements, an eclecticism born of the peculiar conditions which enabled a conquering race to exploit the various techniques and traditions of some of the most artistic people that the world has seen. What he's saying here is Islam never developed anything originally except the Quran, and that they stole everything from Christians and Jews. Apart from the riches and prosperity of the conquered lands and the enormous revenues which the absolute power of the caliphs Apart from the riches and prosperity of the conquered lands, and the enormous revenues which the absolute power of the caliphs enabled them to spend in satisfaction of their personal caprice, the social and political developments of the empire favored the growth of Muslim art. The existence of a number of independent emirates produced a series of brilliant capitals, each one consciously rivaling the splendors of Baghdad, while dynastic changes and palace revolutions often resulted in the creation of new imperial cities. The oriental character of the rulers is shown in their distaste for inherited buildings, their slackness in repair, their ennui over ever counseling new places of residence. The Muslim inclination towards works of piety and public utility was responsible for the construction of schools, fountain, baths, hospitals, and caravanserai, as well as more strictly religious foundations such as mosques, seminaries, and convents. The expansion of Islam was marked for the first time by great building activity. 5 years after the death of the Prophet, Basra on the lower Euphrates and Kufa south of Babylon were founded to serve as centers of Muslim influence in Mesopotamia. One of the first consequences of the conquest of Egypt was the building of the Mosque of Amr, named after the victorious general, while the so-called Mosque of Omar at Jerusalem and that of Sidi Okba at Kairouan have a similar origin. The Great Mosque of Damascus was reconstructed to enhance the splendor of the Umayyads, and the centralizing of the government in that city was accompanied by a flowering of all the arts. The Abbasid ascendancy created the glories of Baghdad, and magnificent palaces arose during the 8th and 9th centuries, most of which were swept away by the Mongolian invasions. All the great periods of Muslim art are linked in like manner to political events. The power of the Marinids at Fez, of the Fatimites at Cairo, was shown by the adornment of their capitals. The dominance in later centuries of the Seljuk Turks in Armenia, of Timur at Samarkand, or of the great Moguls in northern India is recorded by the buildings they have left behind them, a remarkable testimony to the unity and vitality of Muslim art, in its mature stages and its influence over Asiatic and uncivilized conquerors. In Spain, above all, the foundation of the Umayyad power ushers in an era of unequaled splendor, which reaches its height in the early part of the 10th century. The great University of Cordova is thronged with students from all parts of the Muslim Empire, while the city itself excites the wonder of visitors from Germany and France. The banks of the Guadalquivir are covered with luxurious villas, and born of the ruler's caprice rises the famous Palace of the Flower, a fantastic city of delights. Little remains of the architecture of this period, which may well have rivaled, if not surpassed, the later triumphs of Alcazar and Alhambra, with which some 4 centuries later the Moorish potentates enriched Seville and Granada. This dude, he didn't talk this highly of Rome. You read this, he makes it sound like the Muslim empire of this time was the greatest empire that has ever existed. Like, I'm sorry, the Spanish, as they were reconquering Spain, built greater things than Islam could ever hope to. This idea that the Muslims were like the peak of civilization is retarded. It's ridiculous. How much more do I got to read of this? 2 pages? Ugh. I cannot wait to get finished with this. Yeah, they steal all of these ideas from the Byzantine Empire, and then they institute them in Spain, and all of a sudden it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. It's like, okay, the Byzantines were already making stuff like this, and the Gothic is better. The Gothic architecture style is so much better than anything the Muslims have, than anything the Byzantines ever had. The Gothic is just the best architecture. It's the best art style. The art style of the Middle Ages far surpasses anything. Western art is just superior. European civilization is the greatest civilization that has ever existed. And that includes Spain during the Middle Ages when they're reconquering Spain. They're driving these Muslim invaders out of the country and building wonders that Islam could never hope to, they could never dream of building. I'm getting sick of the yeah, I'm getting sick of this guy. As the rise and fall of dynasties determined the flowering times of Muslim art, so the social conditions of the empire, which have already been outlined, show themselves in its inner development. The Arabs of the pre-Islamic period possessed little architecture, and it was thus inevitable that the earlier Muslim structures should follow the tradition of the conquered territories. Yeah, they stole everything. They have no claim to any of this architecture style. It's a Byzantine architecture style. The Hagia Sophia is the most beautiful mosque in the world. Do you know why? Because it used to be a Catholic church. Because it was built by Justinian, I think. Yeah. Because it was built by Catholics. Because it is a Catholic building. And they took that style and they built mosques after that style. It's a Byzantine art style. The architecture is Byzantine. It's not Muslim. It's not Arabian. They have no claim to it. In Syria and Egypt, Christian basilicas were taken over with little alteration, and even when new buildings were constructed, the pillars and capitals were looted from ruined churches. Byzantine mosaic and Coptic wood carvings were extensively used in the decoration of the mosques, and there is hardly a feature of structure or ornament which cannot be traced to earlier tradition. An interesting example of regional influence is the minaret and its various forms. In Mesopotamia, the minaret with helicoidal ramp surmounted by a kiosk is modeled on the ziggurats of ancient Babylon, the squat four-sided towers with prismatic continuation, which form the minarets of Damascus, recall the funeral monuments of pagan and Christian times, and this type is also found in Spain and the Maghreb. Carried to those regions by the religious and political influences of the Umayyad capitals. Egyptian minarets seem to owe their origin to the famous pharaohs of Alexandria, with its retreating prisms and its crowning lantern. Persia, with its tradition of elegant and balanced shape, adopts the form of tall circular towers, while India, land of redundancies, masses its shaft in luxuriant designs. The Ottoman school, impressed perhaps by the triumphal columns of Constantinople, reared the high candles ending in sharp pointed cones and girded by balconies at different heights, which dominate to this day the city of Istanbul. Islamic art, then, is not the sudden creation of a new style. Like the other expressions of Muslim culture, it owes its origin to the long-matured achievements of ancient civilizations. It is the fusion of these borrowed elements which is new. Melted by the fires of Arab energy and conquest, they merge into one another and issue finally in a new substance. Transported from country to country, bands of architects and masons, armies of laborers and slaves transferred to a different medium their various techniques. Wood carving is applied to stone. The brilliant textiles of Persia are imitated in brick and marble, and effects of relief and design give way to those of contrasted material and color. Above all, the inner spirit of Islam acts as a unifying force upon the fluid elements. This is done better in France, by the way. This idea had already been worked out in France by the monks. This is kind of how Cluny is built. And they just did it better. The Catholics, Western civilization just did it better. Maybe they did it a little bit later, but they did it better. And they developed it themselves. They didn't steal it. They didn't conquer these nations, take all of their ideas and say, oh, these are actually Muslim now. No, France developed it. Christian civilization developed it themselves. They developed it organically. Above all, the inner spirit of Islam acts as a unifying force upon the fluid elements. The requirements of Mohammedan ritual make themselves felt. The mihrab or niche facing towards Mecca with all eyes turned in prayer receives architectural treatment commensurate with its importance. The courtyard and well impose a definite character upon the structure of the mosque. The injunction ascribed to Muhammad which forbade the representation of men or animals, exercised a radical influence upon Muslim decoration. The Umayyads of Syria and the Persian rulers, faithful to the old figure art of their countries, ignored the prohibition. But elsewhere, formal ornament alone is employed, and from the acanthus, the vine tendril, and other motives of classical and Asiatic art, evolves the arabesque, the stylized running pattern of flowers and fruit, which accompanies so frequently the friezes or picturesque Arabic lettering. The process of abstraction goes yet further. Natural forms are distorted out of all semblance to their originals, and rhythm and symmetry are the main features of the magnificent designs of later Mohammedan artists. Interlacing geometric systems, rectilinear or curvilinear symbols of unity and diversity satisfied the mystic appetites of the Arabian, presenting, it has been said, under the appearance of fancy and caprice, the reality of a secret logic and a mathematical coherence. Thank goodness it is over. I've never heard him speak so highly of a civilization. It's like, and I'm not saying that nothing developed under Islam. Like, obviously they took what was and developed it to some degree. But he talks, like I said, he talks about Islam like it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. He didn't talk that highly of the Romans. He didn't talk that highly of the Byzantines. He talked highly of Constantinople, but not like this. Like, it's crazy. It's crazy. And the West just did it better. The Gothic architecture, the medieval art is just so vastly superior to anything Islam ever came up with. And some of the Islamic art is nice. Like, there's obvious talent there, but it just doesn't compare. Christian civilization will not be beat. But we're done. We're done with this section, and I could not be happier. I feel like I need a break from this book again. But we're not going to take one, because we're getting into Charlemagne. And if he has nothing good to say about Charlemagne, then I've got nothing good to say about Moss. He bothers me. This author bothers me. First of all, the way he structures some of his sentences is just nonsensical. He has some run-on sentences that he does. He has some sentences that take up whole paragraphs, basically. And then he'll just not use the word "and" sometimes. He'll not use the I think they're the articles "and," "or," "but." He'll just throw words together. He needs to use more periods. That would fix this book. I'm not gonna lie to you. I cannot wait to be done with this book so I can read something that's actually interesting. It's interesting, but he bothers me. But again, we'll figure out what we're reading next. I'll look through my PDF collection and we'll see. We'll see what we got. But I'm going to call it here. Friday, we will start part 4, The Age of Charlemagne. I cannot wait. I love Charlemagne. My favorite. But we'll start that on Friday. Friday at the normal time. And yeah, that's it for me. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave a comment. If you leave a question. Friday. Something like that. I'm happy it's Friday. I'm happy tomorrow's Thursday. Because that means it's almost Friday. Fridays are cool.
Black Friday. But y'all have a good night, and I will see you all later.